Bullshit.
It's the No BS Marketing Show. I'm Dave Mastovich, CEO of Massolutions, the world's only no bullshit marketing firm. Today, we have part 2 of my conversation with Ed Shriver, one of the founding partners of Strada Architectural firm. In the first episode, Ed talked about why he chose architecture and how his experience in the military helped shape his leadership style. In this particular part of the episode, he delves into how working with Disney impacted him and how he was able to help Disney and how he and the partners of Strada have infused their own culture and evolved over time, and how they focus on design with people in mind. Hope you enjoy it. Then you get back to the United States and you come back to Pittsburgh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I came back to Pittsburgh. A couple of friends were either still hanging around here or when they heard I was back, they came back. And so I found a job with a little architectural firm that I hated. Lasted about 2 months. And I got another job with a bigger firm, JSA, and I spent 20 years there. And my best friend who inspired me to go into the Army, he took my job with the little architecture firm. And then a few years later, when that firm folded, he came to work at JSA as well. So we literally, kind of our whole career was like that. But
the 20 years at JSA, any management and leadership positions there?
Yeah, probably the last 8 or 10 years were management positions beyond just project management. But I was operations for a long time. I worked directly under the, I guess he would be the CFO, Tom Schmidt. He was my mentor. So Tom taught me what I hadn't learned in the Army about how being an architect really worked. And he was great. He was great. I remember a story. I was the project architect for the renovation of the Monroeville Mall. And we were taking the ice skating rink out of Monroeville Mall and turning it into a food court. And I was the project manager, and the president of the company was the principal in charge of the project. And I had done all the drawings, most of the design work. I did the budgeting. I did almost everything. Went out to bids, and the day that the bids were due, Jim Johnson, the president of the company, was on vacation in Florida. So he called Tom and said, would you go with Ed to the bid openings, blah, blah, blah. So we went out together. I think we had 5 contractors bid on the project. And the average of the 5 projects was exactly my estimate, which is unheard of. Absolutely dumb luck. I take no credit for being a great estimator. It was probabilistic dumb luck. But after we finished, as we're driving back to the office, he says, let's go have a beer. So we stopped off somewhere in Green Tree and had probably 10 beers. At one point in the discussion, Tom said, so where do you want your career to go? What do you want to do? And I said, I want your job. And he said, great. That's what I'm looking for. So he became my mentor. And we worked together until he had a heart attack, lived another 6 or 8 years after that. But he retired after the heart attack. And it was a great relationship. I learned an awful lot from Tom and still think about him a lot.
Mentoring is a huge part of all of our lives. So I'm glad you had the chance to talk about that. We've learned a couple things about Ed Shriver of Strada Architects, that when the going gets tough, drink beer to make decisions. That's how you ended up in the Army. That's how you end up celebrating this great estimate and then becoming the number 2 with your mentor. When do you realize the entrepreneurial spirit kicks in, that it's time for you to start your own thing?
I think I was drinking again. Well, I was part of the AIA, American Institute of Architects, Pittsburgh chapter. I was on the board of the chapter at that time.
You were the founder, though, too, as well, right?
Yes, of Strada, not AIA.
Okay, all right.
No, I'm not that old. So I'm on the board of the AIA, and Al Cuteri was also on the board.
We know Al.
Partners. And John Martin was on the board, another one of my partners. And Michael Stern was not on the board, but Michael was a consultant to the chapter on a project that we had been working on. So I knew all of those guys. And I came home after a board meeting, and I got a voicemail. This is back before emails. Voicemail from the president of JSA, the new president, whom I did not like and did not have any respect for. But it was a voicemail saying that he had just hired a new marketing director for the company. And the guy that they had hired's name was Tony Poli. Well, Tony Poli was Al Cuteri's partner up until the moment I heard he had left. He didn't even talk to Al. Al was completely caught off guard.
Whoa.
And so I called the executive director of the chapter, because Ann and I were good friends, and I said, what the hell do I do with this? I mean, and of course we had been drinking. Yes. Always good to get a second opinion when you've been drinking.
Wait, I know Al.
Yeah.
Did Al kick this guy's ass?
May damn well have. It got ugly. But, so all of a sudden there was this little explosion in the architectural community. And so shortly thereafter, I got fed up with the JSA shtick, and I said, I'm out of here. And Al at that point was short a partner by about maybe a month. So when I quit, I didn't quit to go to work with Al, but when I quit, I had kind of this idea of a firm made of the four of us. And so I reached out to all of them and I said, why don't we sit down and talk for a little while? I have this idea about a new firm that I think would be good for all of us. And we got together, had more drinking, and kind of hashed out the idea of Strada.
It's so important when you have a company to build the culture. And so you went out to find people with like-minded values, and you found the four of you, and that kind of drove the beginning of Strada. Talk a little bit about how that culture began and then how it's evolved to where it is today.
Mm-hmm. I think that similar culture is important. Values are important. But I also think that different perspectives are important. You don't want a firm full of yes men or people who all think exactly alike, but you do need the same values. And so our thoughts around what Strada could be was that with these four different perspectives, John Martin, who is award-winning architectural designer. John's a great guy, and he's, in my mind, the best architect going, certainly the best architect I've ever worked with as a designer. Michael is still outstanding urban designer and landscape architect. Michael went to Harvard. He taught at University of Virginia. He was the project manager for the city of Pittsburgh when they redid the entire downtown master plan. So he managed that whole process. It's the process that put the stadiums where they are now. It identified the Fifth and Forbes corridor as a target that was critical to fix Market Square.
And that's all done through Strada?
No. This was before Strada.
Okay.
That was what Michael had done with the city. And then Al and I both had strong practice experience. We knew how to be architects and do that well and such. So it was a good mix. And the values were there. We wanted to make a difference. We were strongly focused on urban design and city planning and that kind of thing. We weren't interested in doing McDonald's or Ryan Homes or things like that. We wanted to work downtown. We wanted to make a difference. That was a period at which there were several development schemes floated about the Fifth and Forbes corridor, and, they were bulldozing sections of downtown and proposals like that. And we were looking at that going, we could do better than this. Both we and the four of us, and as a city, we can do better than this. So those were the kinds of discussions that sort of brought us together.
So in architecture, with marketing, what we can make fun of when there's lousy marketers, they do like bullshit marketing and they do lousy creative and they talk in your face and they do stuff that's just garbage. Okay.
We do that too.
But it doesn't really hurt the world much, I guess, other than bad social media, bad billboards, bad messaging. But when there's architects that are compromising the values, it impacts a city, a region. Talk about that a little bit.
It does, but it's hard to judge a design if you are not on the inside. You don't know what the budgets are. You don't know what the program is. You don't know what the client's vision was. We can do phenomenal sculpture, but we can't do buildings until we have a client who's got a program that wants that we can then solve those problems. But if the building costs $10 million and the client can't afford it, then it doesn't matter how pretty it is. We can challenge the client. We can push them to try to make things better. But unless you understand all of those elements, it's hard to judge another architect's work. You can look at the really nice ones and say, wow, that's, the Guggenheim. Wow, that's great. That's a very cool building. Probably cost today's dollars $2,500 a square foot. Most buildings cost $150 a square foot. Guggenheim's got money. They can do that.
That being said, though, I think philosophically, you're probably being humble and politically correct, because philosophically, you can tell the difference between architects. And I've worked as a company, our company's worked with a number of architects, and then in other jobs when I was responsible for some building expansion, I worked with multiple architects. And there are some that have a philosophy that's a little bit more volume oriented and margin oriented. And when you walk into Strada, you can tell the culture, and everyone on our team has said this, that when you first walk into Strada, you can tell the culture that this is not a cookie cutter, volume-based architectural firm.
Yeah, I think that's true, and thank you. I'm glad that shows. There's sort of maybe three silos. One is the cookie cutter, repetitious, make money things, McDonald's. Once you got McDonald's down, you can make a lot of money doing McDonald's. On the other end of the spectrum is the architect who doesn't really care what the client thinks. It's their project and they own it. And honest to God, I have heard architects say, he hired me to do the job. Now get the hell out of the way and I'll design it. And that's the other end of the spectrum, mostly because they don't get a lot of repeat clients. But that's the other side. We're more in the middle. I feel strongly that Strada is not so much a design firm as it is a creative firm, that we look to resolve those issues in the most creative way possible to meet all of the requirements. In fact, we had strategic planning retreat last week, and the example I used is IDEO, is a creative design firm. It's not so much about what these iPhones look like. It's the fact that there was no conception of this until IDEO conceived of it. That's what I think Strada is that kind of combination of technical and artistic and practical and budget all together. How do you make all of those pieces work? If it's just beautiful and it's not code compliant, it doesn't matter. Or you can't afford it, doesn't matter. So I think the key, at least for me and for Strada, is focus on creativity.
Your big idea is design with people in mind. And I think you are alluding to that, but talk a little bit more about how design with people in mind resonates with you and your clients and your clients' clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we started the firm with that whole concept. At that point, we were calling it Places for People, but it is where we start in the creative process. It's not sculpture. It's not music. It's people places. That's what drives us. That's what we're interested in. I'm fascinated with the whole concept of neuroscience, how the brain perceives space and how space affects our brains. Winston Churchill's great line that we shape our buildings, then they shape us. And that's absolutely true. What we don't really understand is how that happens. And so we're working with Disney down at Epcot on an expansion to the Japanese pavilion. And it's fascinating to me how Disney designs their parks because they are so good at creating space that affects people, that makes you feel this way or that way. And how they do that is really fascinating. It's more set design than it is architecture. But when you work with them, you find out how hard it is to make the architecture to support the set design to create the effect. And it's been a real education as to the neuroscience of architecture.
Talk a little bit about your work with Disney and specifically Disney's philosophy of Imagineering.
Mm-hmm. When we started Strada, one of the examples that I had in mind was Walt Disney Imagineering, because Disney Imagineering was built out of basically set designers and lighting technicians and people like that. And Walt Disney started putting those people together to create his own design firm, but it wasn't a whole bunch of architects. It was a whole bunch of different design talents together, and he would throw out some new concept. I think we ought to do a show around Pirates of the Caribbean. And then a bunch of them sit down and figure out what's the story, what's the set to support the story, how do we create the lighting, how do we create the sound effects, how do we do all of that. All of these people are in the same design firm effectively. And then they go out and they build it. And that's my idea of what Strada should be doing, sitting down with experts. We have architects, we have interior designers, we have landscape architects, we have exhibit design, we have graphic design. We have a whole bunch of different expertises in the firm. We really like to find polymaths, people who have multiple interests in different areas, because those kinds of people are curious, they're creative, they're constantly seeing things from different perspectives. And that's the kind of people we want at Strada, is the kind of people who they're interested in architecture, but they might also be training dogs for the blind, or they're learning statistics online at edX. That kind of curiosity and interests are the kinds of talents that we want to pull together.
You can see your passion come out when you talk about Imagineering and design with people in mind and how they're tied together. You've done some work with Disney in the past and you're doing more now?
Well, we're still finishing up the Japanese project right now. We've submitted our portfolio to the contracting folks to see if we can be put on the approved architect list. So we'll see how that goes, but we'd certainly like to do more there.
It's exciting to have you working with Disney. Now I'm going to do some rapid fire. I'm going to go back to those 3 examples that I gave to start the show that Strada worked on here in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And I want you to just take a few seconds and just tell us the one thing that you remember that's a memorable part of that project. And we'll start first with Market Square Place in downtown Pittsburgh.
Okay. That project was the G.C. Murphy buildings, because it's actually 7 buildings, was the crux of the problem in Pittsburgh when Tom Murphy was the mayor and the Fifth and Forbes, Michael's work on the master plan. Nobody could figure out what to do with that. The preservationists wanted the building saved, but the developers wanted it tore down. And so that was basically the hang up for GC Murphy for years. And a client of ours, Millcraft, finally stepped up and decided to take a shot at it. And I remember the first meeting, the kickoff meeting, and it was in our conference room. There were 10 or 12 people. And the client said, okay, we're going to kick this thing off. Our plan is to tear the building down, and here's what we want to do. And I said, you can't do that. The preservationists will just crucify. Haven't you been watching the news for the last 3 years? I said, it'll never happen. And we had a 30, 45-minute heated discussion about tearing it down versus not tearing it down. And finally, Jack Pyatt, the president of the company, said, okay, fine, we won't tear it down. But remember, this is your idea. And so we worked out a way to interconnect 7 different buildings, and their CFO, Brian Walker, worked out a way to make it work economically. There's creativity too. Brian would work great in Strada. But anyway, so we created a project that is both economically feasible, it is LEED Gold level, and a historic tax credit project, all of that without tearing the building down.
That's a success. All right, let's go to Uber Advanced Technologies in Pittsburgh. What do you remember most about that project?
It was the most creative challenge I can remember as a project. Not because it was a hard program or anything, but the schedule was tight. The program was constantly evolving, because when you're doing research, you're trying to guess 2 years ahead what kinds of construction you need to do, but the rate of change is so fast that you're tearing out stuff before the paint dries because somebody's got a better idea. And things were just evolving. People were coming and going from the crew. It was my most challenging project management project. I think it's beautiful. I like it a lot. I just love working with smart people. So you get to work with 200 PhDs and robotics people, and it's going to be fun.
It's another success. Then the third one was the North Shore Place.
North Shore Place. This is one of our longest running projects. We actually, when they tore down Three Rivers Stadium and opened that whole space, the city put out a request for developers to develop that space in between it. And Continental Real Estate was selected to be the master developer in conjunction with both the Pirates and the Steelers. And so Continental decided that for their first project, they would do a design competition. And they picked, I think, 6 firms. Actually, initially they picked 5 firms. Then they added us. We were already working with Continental on another smaller project. And somebody said, well, maybe Strada we ought to give them a shot. So we took that on, designed what is now the Equitable building. Well, I call it the Equitable building. Now it's the insurance company over there. But we designed that. The third-hand report about the selection process was that all of the Continental Real Estate, all the Continental people got together after having all looked at the submissions from all the 6 or so firms. And Continental's, I guess he's president or chairman, Frank Cass, and his son flew in from Columbus as part of this decision. And Frank's son came in. And before everybody's even sat down yet, he walks in and he says, well, if anybody doesn't think Strada's the only choice, you're an ass. And then he sat down. And everyone's looking at each other going, well, that was a short meeting. So we got picked. And since then, we've built everything between the stadiums except the Hyatt Place Hotel.
What's that like to, as a part of the architectural firm that drove that? So anytime you go to the North Shore, anytime you're in Market Square, there's got to be a sense of pride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's great to look around the city and realize, we did that. My wife's a tax accountant, and she always tells me that she really envies the fact that I can point at things and people can see what I do. She said, I never get to show anybody their tax return. So it's a great profession. It's a great pleasure to see things get built, to be able to point those things out. And there is, of course, the downside, which is when people all look at it and say, that's not very good. But it goes with the, wow, that's great. So, it sort of washes out.
Ed, what's a tool that you could tell our audience that you use on a daily, weekly, quarterly basis to increase productivity, improve communication, or help with your leadership?
I don't know that I have any tools in particular. The leadership skills I learned in the Army. And it's basically you take care of your people and they'll take care of you. And I think that it's really important that you're always teaching, you're always mentoring, but you're also always protecting the people that work with you. And they respect that.
That's some no BS words to live by. And was there anything you thought I'd asked you that I didn't, or is there any last comments you'd like to make?
No, I really hadn't thought about what you were going to ask, because I know I don't have anything there, and I think I've talked enough. Well,
thanks for being on the No BS Marketing Show.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thanks for being loyal No BSers. Remember, go to massolutions.biz to sign up for your No BS weekly marketing fix. And also remember to ask yourself, what's the big idea, and build your story around the answer. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.